Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a science fiction horror film from the United States, English language, released in the year 2015, directed by Joe Begos, and this film is called The Mind's Eye. So The Mind's Eye is about this main character. He's walking along a lone stretch of road, and we actually find out he's trying to look for someone he cares about very much. He can't really find her. So he's walking along this road, and then all of a sudden he's confronted by these policemen. They're very aggressive towards him, and he gets very angry. And this is at the point we realise that this main character has psychokinetic powers, and these powers are very powerful, and they're actually very dangerous. He doesn't like using them, but when he gets angry, he can't really help it. So he really needs something to calm him down and trying to restrain the powers and to try and control them. And this comes in the form of a doctor. Now, the doctor comes to the police station. He says that he'll take care of everything, that he tells this main character that he owns a psychokinetic clinic that will help him to harness his powers and control them more. And so this main character thinks, okay, well, I'm going to try this. He goes to the psychokinetic clinic with this doctor, but this is where he realizes that the person he's looking for might be inside this clinic, and that she possesses the same sort of powers as he does, but he realizes that maybe she's in grave danger because she's being held against her will. And so as the movie goes along, the main character realizes that this doctor has sinister intentions that have nothing to do with the well-being of his patients, but just his to build his own sense of empowerment. So it's a very, very sinister sort of plot that's going to follow this main character, and whether or not he can come out of it in the end is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now, my thoughts on The Mind's Eye. I was actually quite excited to come and see this film. Now, I know a lot of people didn't like Joe Begos' other film, Almost Human. I thought that movie was definitely a homage to 80s horror films, and I thought the negatives to that movie also worked as a positive because it gave it that charm that a lot of 80s horror films had. 80s horror films weren't about Oscar-worthy nominations. They were all about being entertaining, and I thought Almost Human was a very entertaining science fiction horror film that I could actually play and watch again. And so that movie was very low budget, and the low budget sort of constraints that the movie had do become evident, but I still thought it was a very fun and very charming experience that was very nostalgic. And so coming into The Mind's Eye, I was expecting something very similar. A lot of people say that this is a Scanners wannabe from David Cronenberg, and I haven't seen Scanners, so I was actually happy I didn't have that to compare it to. But what I like about Joe Begos is that he's trying to emulate films that have actually come before him and actually very popular to get a name for himself. And now it's very hard for a lower budget horror filmmaker to actually get out there. He doesn't have the budget, he doesn't have the marketing tools in order to compete with the bigger films. So if you're making movies that he's obviously a fan of and he's trying to emulate what those films did, it's going to get the attention of people. And so I think it's a very smart thing. It's not plagiarism, it's not ripping someone off, it's just using film as a way to show that you are a fan of the genre. And I believe that Joe Begos is definitely a fan of this genre, and it's once again apparent in The Mind's Eye. This is a science fiction horror film, and I think Joe Begos really understands what it is to be science fiction. This is a movie that is very David Cronenberg-esque as far as body horror is concerned. There are some very horrible things that happen to these people's bodies, and that's everything you want from this style of movie. And so the movie does remind you of a lot of 80s horror films, whether it's through the soundtrack or the production. I thought the cinematography is very neon lighting, and that neon lighting captured you in a very fever-pitched dream-like atmosphere. And that atmosphere is nightmarish. The atmosphere really matched what was actually going on. And so I really liked the way the production looked, and that was the same with Almost Human. Almost Human, I thought the cinematography was excellent. It was very bleak. It actually felt like you're in a nightmare. And these nightmares, it won't let you go for the 90 minutes. And in The Mind's Eye, I thought that once again, the 90-minute runtime was absolutely perfect, because it never gives itself a chance to get boring. It never bogs itself down. It always has a very continuous flow to the film that I thought gives it that entertaining quality. And so that was something that I believe The Mind's Eye really understood. It really understands what it is to be 80s horror, and it's a very good homage to it because it was very nostalgic, and it actually sent me down memory lane when I actually watched this film. So the overall the setting of the psychokinetic sort of clinic I thought was fairly good. It's set mostly in this sort of clinic, and it was almost like it was a cartoon where you've got the evil villain up against the good guy who's trying to save the day. And so it's a very simplistic plot, and in some regards people might see that simplistic plot as a negative, but for me it was a positive because it never distracts itself. It knows exactly what it wants to do, and I thought that it was complemented by absolutely phenomenal gore effects and phenomenal special effects as far as the psychokinetic battles are concerned. When you've got films that are lower budget, they try something very extravagant and it comes across as very cheap, but I think Joe Begos really understood the limitations of his budget, and he makes something that looked really, really good. And so this is a very, very talented director, and I believe that he deserves a lot more recognition than he gets, because he actually delivers something that is very self-aware, and that self-awareness can almost forgive the negatives negatives that the film has. And so the script I thought was so-so. The acting wasn't terrible. A lot of people, once again, in Almost Human, his other film, a lot of people criticised the acting in that movie. I didn't think the acting was as bad as a lot of people say it was. The acting is the same sort of feel in this film. There's a lot of the same sort of actors, especially the main character. I actually like the main character in this film. I thought, okay, well, there's a certain sense of tragedy to his personality. And so he's looking for this person that he cares for so much, and when he's going through, I could actually sense the torment that he was going through. He didn't like these powers that he had, but he had to try and control them somehow. And I thought there were some scenes where I thought he did a fairly good job. And then you've got the interest that he has, but the problem with these other characters is I didn't think they had any chemistry between them, and that's unfortunately the negatives to this film, is that the story is very paper thin. The story you've seen 100 times before, and yes, it can work in its favour, but if you're after something with a lot of depth, then you're going to be very disappointed, because it doesn't really have anything to the story. It doesn't really utilise the full potential that it had as far as the psychokinetic sort of atmosphere that the film possesses. I didn't think it really utilised that as much as it could, and I thought the script was lacking somewhat, because these characters can't really get out of their 2D dimension sort of restraints, and it doesn't really blossom out to a three-dimensional shape. So I didn't really care whether or not these characters got what they wanted. All I wanted was to see the great visual effects and the great gore effects, and so it is basically relying on that, which is a lot of, as I said, a lot of 80s horror films relied on the gore, relied on the special effects, and it had that certain charm to it, where in a normal film it would be a negative, but the charm to 80s horror was that they were not perfect, but it was basically seeing the perfection in the imperfections that made the films what they were. And so I would say that if you can see the perfections in the imperfections in the mind's eye, I think you're going to really enjoy what this movie has to offer. There's some very dark moments, some very grotesque moments, so it does have the body horror element, it does have the science fiction element, and the 80s homage, to put the icing on the cake, makes this a film that's not brilliant in any regard, but it's still definitely a very entertaining film that I'd recommend to the 80s horror fans, and as a result of that, I'm going to give The Mind's Eye 2.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.